Hello, welcome everyone. Today is Saturday, July 25th, 2026, and this is Explaining Autistic Burnout. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. And okay, so before we get started, whether you're here live or watching the recording, I want to explicitly state that you are welcome to participate with your camera off or on. I do not mind cameras being off. You're welcome to move around, fidget, stim, tick, doodle, look away, take notes, eat, leave, or pause the recording and come back later. Please see to your own needs. There are a lot of ways to pay attention. It doesn't have to just be sitting still looking at the speaker like we were taught in school. Please take care of yourself. And if you're here live on Zoom, you can turn the chat on or off. You can turn the closed captions on or off, and you can turn that little picture of yourself off if you don't want to see it. Just right-click on it and click Hide Self View. You can also move the slider bar between my picture and the slides to make either one bigger or smaller, whatever's easier on your eyes. And everything that's written on the slides, I will also be saying aloud. So if you're just listening, you won't miss anything. And there will be a complete human edited transcript afterwards so that you can read everything if that works better for you. And I do ask that you keep your microphone on mute to reduce background noise because some people have auditory sensitivities. During the Q&A, you can talk to the group and that will be great too. Okay, so this workshop is intended both for autistic people who are in burnout right now or have been or can feel it coming. I hope to give you a better understanding of what you're going through and that it's not just you. These are predictable patterns and there is a way out. And it's also for people who are trying to support someone in burnout, a parent, partner, friend, therapist, manager, employer, to better understand what someone in burnout is going through and what helps and what doesn't. I'm able to explain this stuff because I've been through autistic burnout multiple times, and I've also been burnout free since 2015. That's 11 years. And I've worked with other autistics for more than 6 years now, professionally, helping them get out of burnout, making their life more autistic friendly. So here's a little bit about me so that you know where I'm coming from. I am autistic and AuDHD, which is autistic and ADHD together. That is a surprisingly common combination. I grew up being called weird, strange, stubborn, a maverick, and the family explanation for most of it was, well, that's just Heather. I always felt different from everyone around me, and I didn't understand why at the time. And I tried so hard to fit in, to do what was expected, to hold down a job, enjoy a party, make a phone call without my stomach clenching and procrastinating for weeks. I worked hard to be normal, but it was always just a little bit off. And I worked hard at school and work, and in fact managed to accomplish a lot that looked genuinely impressive from the outside, but it never lasted. Eventually, I would burn out, then recuperate and manage for a while and burn out over again, over and over. Twice, it shut down my whole life for an extended period of time. We're talking on the order of years. And then I figured out that I was autistic at 33 and got an official diagnosis at 34, and later figured out that I'm ADHD also, and also that I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It explained so much of my life and gave me hope that if I understood myself better, things might be different. I spent the next several years in a deep dive figuring myself out and working through a lot of the old gunk and figuring out how to work in ways that worked for me, healing complex relationship trauma, and more. Now I work with adult identified autistics and AuDHD people to do their own version of the same thing, building lives that actually fit how our brains work. I'm a professional certified coach and a Martha Beck certified master coach. You can find me at autismchrysalis.com. I do want to clarify that I'm a coach, not a therapist or a doctor. I don't diagnose anything, and nothing that I say here is medical advice. What I can do is tell you what the research says and what I see over and over in my work, because autistic burnout doesn't need to be a mystery. It is understandable and predictable, and there are clear patterns. What's kept me out of burnout for the last 11 years isn't an accident. It's not that my life suddenly got better or that the system suddenly got more accepting. It didn't. But I still managed to get better even when it was hard and when things were stacked against me. What I want to share with you today is some of what I figured out along the way and what I've seen work consistently for my clients as well. Um, okay, so I want to be upfront about what to expect today because a lot of free webinars turn out to just be a sales pitch in disguise with very little useful information. And don't want you to spend the whole time just waiting for the catch. This workshop is chock full of good information and a lot of free resources a lot of the resources that I'm going to mention are free. At the end, I am going to spend a few minutes to tell you about my course on how to recover from autistic burnout that's starting in October, because for some of you, that's honestly a good next step. So yes, there's a bit of a pitch in there. And I'd rather just tell you that up front. And if you know that that's not for you, you can leave before then. I'll let you know when it's coming. But there's no hard sell, no false scarcity. The first 5 people who sign up, no urgency, buy today. I don't work that way. You can take everything useful from this, buy nothing from me, and I'll be glad that you came. That accomplishes my mission of being genuinely useful to the autistic community. I just want to let you know what to expect so that you can relax and learn. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with why burnout is so hard to explain in the first place, which is really the reason that this workshop exists. Then I'll describe what autistic burnout actually is and why it happens, and what it's actually like from the inside. We'll talk about why it takes so long to recover, and the most common things that people try that don't work, and why they don't work, and what genuine recovery actually takes. And for the supporters here, what you can do that helps, and what backfires, even though it seems like it should help. Then we'll talk about what's possible in recovery. And at the end, I'll share a little bit about my burnout recovery course for those who are interested. And if we have a little time left, I'll be happy to answer some questions. And for everyone here, I'm also making a short written handout about autistic burnout that you can download and hand to a doctor or employer or family member. I'll put that in the email that will go out after this with the recording, and it'll be on my website as of Monday if you're watching this after the fact. That's autismchrysalis.com. Okay, we've got a lot to go through. Are you ready? Okay, so why this is so hard to explain and why that isn't your fault. This workshop exists because it's one of the most common requests that I get from my burnout clients and the people who follow me online is for me to explain autistic burnout to their family, doctors, therapists, or employers because they don't have the energy or the words or the ability or the desire to use their limited capacity to explain to people what's going on or to sift through the resources available and point people to the ones that will resonate with each individual person. Because what will land with their sister will be different from what lands with their parent or their boss. One of my clients put it like this. She'd been sending her parents articles and videos for months, and she said, "Why am I the one who has to scour the internet and find things that I think will have the nuggets that might resonate with you?" That's what today is for. And then when I do talk with the parents and other support people, they often express frustration that their loved one has always been a very articulate and self-aware person, but now they almost never talk about what they're going through. It is completely typical for someone in autistic burnout to be an articulate person in general and to be unable to articulate this. Not because they're hiding anything, because they don't have the language to. And they're frustrated and confused as well, and they don't understand why this is happening. That understanding gets built one small piece at a time inside their own head over months or years. I know that from the inside. When I was in it, I couldn't explain it either. I'd share little pieces of my experience with my mom and a couple of close friends as I worked them out, but most of what was happening was going on inside, and I couldn't put words to it yet. And that was genuinely frustrating for me because I am a very, very articulate person and I like being able to say what's going on and why. Now I've explained this like 1,000 times, um, so it's easier for me. Uh, So if you're autistic, my hope is that you can send this recording to someone and be done, or the short handout. And if you're the person who got sent the link, thank you for coming. Seriously, The fact that you showed up already puts you ahead of most. Okay. Um, so what autistic burnout actually is? Autistic burnout is when the buildup of stressors in your life, the sensory stuff, masking, unjust systems, ableism, both from other people and the kind that we internalize, the negative self-talk, all of it, when it's been so much for so long that it exceeds our capacity to deal with it, and the body, excuse me, the body just shuts down to protect itself from any more. There isn't a lot of research on autistic burnout yet, but 3 studies do describe it, and they agree. The first is from Raymaker and colleagues in 2020 in the Journal of Autism in Adulthood. They interviewed autistic adults and analyzed autistic people's own public writing. The second is by Higgins and colleagues in 2021, who worked directly with autistic adults who'd lived through it. And a 2023 study by Arnold and colleagues surveyed 141 autistic adults about their burnout experiences. Between them, they describe the same thing that I just did, a long-term exhaustion that runs through every part of life, a loss of skills and function, things that you used to be able to do that you suddenly can't, and a drop in how much sensory input you can tolerate, built up over years from chronic stress, from masking, from environments that don't accommodate you, and from never getting enough relief to fully recover. One of the autistic people in that research described their experience like this: having all of your internal resources exhausted beyond measure and being left with no cleanup crew. It's like the reserves that you'd normally pull from to get through a hard week are simply not there, and there's nothing bringing them back. I'm defining this because for most autistic people, we spend years trying to figure out what's going on, but nothing quite fits. It gets called depression or laziness or a bad attitude or an adjustment disorder or you've always been so sensitive. It gets called a personal failing, and you can't get help for a personal failing. You can only feel bad about it. But it's not a personal failing. It's a stress condition, and it's real. Okay, so why it happens and why you're doing too much gets it wrong. Here's how this is different from regular burnout. Regular burnout, like work burnout or caregiver burnout, is a volume problem. There's too much on your plate for too long, and the fix follows logically from the cause. Take things off your plate, rest, ease back in. That's good advice, and it works. Autistic burnout isn't a volume problem. It's a mismatch problem. It's the gap between how an autistic nervous system actually works and what the world has been demanding of it, usually for decades. And that means the drain isn't only coming from the to-do list. Most of it is coming from things that never show up on a to-do list at all. And here's what that means practically. Things like sensory stuff. It's overwhelming. The fluorescent lights in the office, the open plan layout, the grocery store, which is bright and loud and full of unpredictable movement and smells and people who might talk to you unexpectedly, the hum of the refrigerator that no one else can hear, someone's perfume, the seam in your shirt. None of these are emergencies. These are the kinds of things that when we mention them, other people say that we're being too sensitive or that it doesn't matter or just get over it. But for us, dealing with them drains energy, every single one of them. And they run continuously all day, every day with no off switch. Cognitive load. A lot of autistic people process social situations analytically. What did that tone mean? Is that a real invitation or a polite comment? Was that a joke? Am I talking too much? I don't understand what she meant by that comment. Would it be rude to ask? Neurotypical people do this mostly automatically, below conscious awareness, at almost no cost. Doing it consciously in real time for every interaction all day is genuinely expensive work. Masking. The continuous performance of coming across as normal or as close to it as you can get, suppressing fidgeting, making the right face, not mentioning that the room is unbearable because you already know that nothing will change, so what's the point of bringing it up? Rehearsing the conversation before you have it, and then reviewing it afterwards for hours or days or years. The autistic community calls this masking. Also, not being believed. When you say that you're struggling with something and you're told, everyone feels like that, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Get over it. You now have two problems: the original problem itself and the work of managing the fact that nobody thinks it's real. Okay, I could go on. Notice that none of these are dramatic. That's what makes them so hard to explain. Nobody can look at your week and see the problem. It's in the background and it's small, but it never stops. Okay, somebody asked me a good question about this recently. Is it possible for autistic people to have occupational burnout, or is it always autistic burnout? And yes, of course, people, autistic people can have other kinds of burnout. Here's how you tell the difference. If it's occupational burnout, here's what happens. You recognize that you're in burnout, you take a hard look at what's been going on at work, and you change the things that are significantly stressing you. You get more help, reduce the load, change your job. You make real changes to the conditions themselves, get some rest, and feel significantly better, and you're able to sustain it. The same thing with caregiving burnout. You reduce the load, get some support, start taking better care of yourself. You decouple the idea of self-care from being selfish. You learn to have boundaries and rest, and you feel significantly better and are able to sustain it. It's absolutely possible for autistic people to have either of those, or just the general, I've had too much on my plate for too long and it's wearing me down kind of burnout. If you fix those specific conditions and get some rest and feel significantly better, then it really was about those specific conditions. Autistic burnout is a more generalized whole life thing. There may well be specific conditions that are stressing you out, and fixing them is worth doing, but it's only going to make partial improvement because there's so much more going on in many more areas of life, and usually has been for a really long time, often since childhood, sometimes since infancy. And I want to explain that because it might sound strange or overly dramatic to say it's been going on since infancy. Babies don't have jobs, they don't have deadlines or obligations or a commute. What could possibly stress them out? But some autistic infants' sensory experiences of the world is far more intense than typical. So picture this. There's a TV on in the background, there are fluorescent lights, the temperature isn't right, and they can't do anything about it or tell anyone what's wrong. There are smells everywhere that they're having a hard time with. There are upset voices, maybe from the TV, maybe from the people taking care of them. And those upset voices are triggering alarms in their brain of danger. And on top of that, this baby is someone who feels other people's emotions very intensely. And the people around them are exhausted and stressed, which is the normal state for new parents. Even under the best of circumstances, with all the love in the world, in a good home, with people doing everything right. That's a lot for a little one who feels things strongly. And nobody in that room is doing anything wrong. I want to be really clear about that last part because if you're a parent listening to this, I'm not describing a failure. I'm describing an ordinary house with an unusually sensitive person in it. And they're dealing with low-level background stress long before anyone is thinking of the typical stressors like homework or a job or mortgage. This is what I mean when I say that autistic burnout isn't a volume problem, it's a mismatch. It's not necessarily how much is on your plate. It's about the mismatch between how your nervous system and brain actually function and the environments that you're in and the expectations of society as to what you should be able to deal with. So even after you fix the obvious thing, the stressful job or whatever it was, and get some rest and get accommodations, This is why it doesn't just get better, because the job was never the whole issue. Does that make sense? And that completely changes what it takes to get better. Because many of the things that help a neurotypical person recover from burnout are the exact things that cause autistic burnout in the first place. Get out more, see people, get back to your old routine, push through the resistance. Those are exactly the things that drain energy. Okay, so let's talk about what it's like from the inside. Because if you, um, excuse me, because this is the part that no one else can picture it unless you've actually been in it. And I want you to know, if you're going through this, that you're not alone. So I'm going to use other people's words as like their own words as much as I can from people describing their own autistic burnout. So a client of mine said, everything feels heavy. It's so hard. I am so tired. I'm too young to be this tired. I just feel deflated. And a few years ago, I was excited about my future, and it's been sucked out of me. Like all of my ambition has been completely used up, like a lifetime's worth. That tank is empty. I don't know where to go with this. This isn't a person who stopped caring. She feels like she's spent a lifetime supply of caring early on and is now looking at an empty tank at an age where she would be just getting started. So when people describe their body, they say things like, I feel like I'm wading through mud, like there's heaviness in my limbs and body. My body just feels heavy and weak, and many days I can't keep from crying. I'm still super tired, even though I slept most of the day. By the way, sleeping alone doesn't fix this. Some people sleep 12 hours a day and wake up exhausted. This isn't a sleep deficit, although sleep does help. It's not going to fix it alone. When describing their brain, people say things like, my brain feels like it works more slowly, or like it's stuck in gridlock. I have trouble recalling words, names, faces, and articulating my thoughts and ideas. It's like thinking through concrete. I thought I had early onset dementia. And this can look like the early stages of dementia, although it isn't. You walk into a room and can't remember why. You go to get a glass of water and forget 3 times in a row. You lose your train of thought halfway through a sentence or forget the name of common objects. One of my clients said, I'm struggling to absorb information, and that feels really hard because that's usually how I get energy. I read, and it's just not sticking. So when describing their sensory experiences, people say things like, everything feels louder and brighter and more overwhelming. My tolerance for everything was diminished. Sensory issues were turned up to 1,000. Things I used to love for regulating started annoying me and making me worse. Any inch of pain was heightened. I had a client describe a smell in her car. It had always been a little unpleasant and always manageable, and then one day it wasn't. Same smell, suddenly it was completely intolerable. Another client came to me about her teenage daughter. The mother said that the girl had always been able to handle things and they were just weren't handleable anymore. Not the sound of people chewing, not the neighbor's lawnmower. Most foods were suddenly off limits because she couldn't stand the texture. Nothing changed in the environment. What changed is that the filter between stimulus and overwhelm is gone. About functioning, people say, my executive functioning plummets, and I can't do basic household things like wash the dishes or laundry. My personal hygiene suffers. I have trouble preparing food and feeding myself. Showering takes too many spoons, so I don't. Then I'm not presentable, so I don't leave the house. Sometimes all I, um, okay, sometimes all I have all day is potato chips, which are my current fixation. Showering is overwhelming. Mostly I just wash up. And skills go. Things a person has been able to do for years. I talked to someone who lost driving. He'd been able, he'd been driving his whole adult life, and he lost the ability to drive and to socialize. He said, "My life is just very small at the moment, and it's hard to see the other side." So I want to be really clear about this for anyone here who isn't autistic, because this is where families often get it wrong. These things are not hard, they're inaccessible. There's a difference. Hard means you could do it if you put more effort into it, but there's no effort left. It's genuinely inaccessible because the reserves that you would use to try with aren't there. And about people, they say, "I can't keep up with basic communication like calls, texts, and emails." Socializing becomes unbearably draining to the point that I self isolate. Just going outside feels like a monumental task. It looks a lot like agoraphobia, but I'm not scared of the world. I'm just exhausted by it. I feel like I'm drowning and invisible to everyone else. I've essentially lost all but one friend. Okay, and I want to say something about the order that these things go in, because there's a pattern to it. The first things to go are the optional events, friendships, the optional things, friendships, social events, hobbies, creative projects, replying to texts. Then politeness goes, and saying things in a nicer way, and having the energy to show other people that you care about them. Not because the caring stopped, but because the energy to express it isn't there. What's left is stuff with consequences: work, school, kids. And those get done barely at an enormous cost, like holding onto the edge of a cliff by your fingernails for a while. And at some point, for some of us, that stops too. You just can't do even those anymore. In my last burnout, I would get home from work, walk straight into my bedroom and collapse in bed, get up several hours later to change and find some food, and then go back to bed until I had to drag myself back to work. I didn't do anything besides that. I stopped seeing friends, dishes piled up. I described it at the time as dragging myself around by the scruff of my neck, until I couldn't anymore and had to quit and didn't do anything but lie in bed. A client wrote to me, "I feel like I've made my life smaller and smaller to try to manage my limited energy to the point where I'm barely existing." Another said, "My life is just very small at the moment, and it's hard to see the other side." Another, "I've shrunk myself for years to fit an ever shrinking capacity. I stopped dreaming." From an online chat, someone wrote, "My therapist helped me recently to see that I'd shrunk to a tiny dot in my own life. I was putting energy into what helped other people function and completely ignoring my own needs." This is a predictable burnout pattern. We make life smaller and smaller to stay survivable, shrinking to a tiny dot. If you're supporting someone and you're thinking, "Well, their life isn't that full, what's the problem?" Here's the reframe. Every one of those contractions was the right call at the time. Each one bought a little bit of breathing room. But the background stress that I described, it's still there. It's not enough just to cut. And we'll talk about that more later. Okay, I want to say one more thing, and this is heavy. I'll be talking about hopelessness and suicidal thinking for just a moment, so please see to your own needs. If that's not something that you want to hear right now, this is a good moment to step away for about 2 minutes or turn the volume off. I'll wave my hand when I'm past it. Um, so one of my clients wrote, I feel like I'm going to die, like I cannot even. My body is giving up, but I need to keep going to survive. It feels like dying very slowly." Suicidal ideation, not because you're sad, but because you're tired of fighting an uphill battle every waking second and cannot take care of yourself. In the Arnold study, about half of respondents showed some level of agreement that suicidal ideation was a consequence of their autistic burnout. Half. I'm not saying that to try and frighten anyone. I'm saying it because there are people here who came to find out whether to take it seriously. This is serious. Okay, that's the hard part. Moving on. So, why does this take so frickin' long? Here's the question that I get asked more than almost any other. It's some variation of, how long is this going to take? And I'll be honest with you, the research can't give you a clean number because it varies so much. The Rainmaker study defines autistic burnout as lasting a minimum of 3 months. In the Arnold study, a third of people said that their longest episode was a year or more. And I know many people who have been in autistic burnout for many years, occasionally decades. There is no reliable average, but there is a reliable pattern to how it goes. And I'm actually going to do another free workshop on the stages of autistic burnout and recovery in depth next month. I'll put the link to sign up for that in the chat. So for now, I want to focus on why it's so slow, because I think understanding why makes it bearable. First, the deficit took years to build. A client said to me recently, "I've been off work for 5 weeks and I've basically made no progress." He was alarmed, and so were his parents, who he was living with again. 5 weeks of leave producing no visible improvement is completely normal in a deep burnout. It took years to empty these reserves. They're not refilling in 5 weeks. Expecting them to is like expecting a bank account with a decade worth of overdrafts to be back in the black after one paycheck. My major burnouts typically took between a year to 3 years to recover to a meaningful degree. And I think that's pretty typical. Okay, second, rest alone doesn't change what caused it. This is what keeps people in the cycle for decades. If you rest, you will get some energy back. But if nothing has changed in the actual conditions, the environment, the masking, the expectations, your relationships, then the energy that comes back will just get used right back up again. And you land right back where you started, except that now you're older and your reserves are lower. Somebody described it this way: as soon as I got out of previous burnouts, I'd go back to living the exact same way as I was before. I pushed myself way too much and worked way too hard, so I'm back in burnout again. That's not a personal failure. That's what happens when you treat a mismatch problem with a volume solution. And third, rest isn't actually restful if you're emotionally beating yourself up about it. You can be physically in bed doing nothing for 8 hours and burn an enormous amount of energy on guilt and shame and negative self-talk. I should be doing this or that, and going over all the things that need to be done and worrying about money running out and what people are thinking and what's wrong with me and why can other people manage and I can't. That isn't restful. Real rest requires the internal noise to come down, not just being in bed or on the couch, not moving much. Reducing pressure and shame isn't being soft. It's not secondary. It's not a nice to have. And it's not giving up or accepting defeat or resigning yourself to never doing anything in life. It is critical. If you're a family member wondering what you can actually do, reducing the pressure and stop trying to motivate people through shame or worry or expressing concern are the most important things that you can do. We'll talk more about this later. Okay, I want to talk briefly about a few things that make burnout worse. Because for a lot of people, burnout isn't the only thing that's going on. Chronic illness and chronic pain, being in pain takes a lot of energy. And other disabilities or health conditions or mental health conditions, and all of the appointments and paperwork and the insurance calls that come with managing health conditions can be practically a full-time job and can use up whatever little executive function that burnout hasn't taken away. Also, Perimenopause and menopause can exacerbate burnout and make everything feel more intense, confusing, and make it harder to figure out. Things like sleep, temperature regulation, memory and word finding, emotional regulation, and sensory tolerance are all exacerbated. The general principle for all of these is the same. They don't mean that recovery is unavailable. They do mean that the timeline and the shape of it are going to be a little different. And comparing yourself to someone who's just recovering from burnout isn't a fair comparison to hold yourself to. And on a practical note, I wouldn't treat every week of the month as if your body has the same capacity. It doesn't. It will vary with hormone levels, with flares, with varying needs. That's not a problem to be solved. That's an acknowledgement of the cycles of life, and it can be accommodated. Okay, how is this landing so far? I want to acknowledge that I'm throwing a lot at you in a short amount of time. Mm. And I just got water on my glasses. Okay. Um, Very relatable, so beautiful. Thank you. Okay. All right. So, oh, right on point. Makes a lot of sense. Good. So let's talk about some things that people typically think are going to work and why they don't. So here are some of the most common strategies that I see people trying, which don't work, and why. Often people come to me as a last resort after having already tried several of these things, complaining that they didn't work and despairing that anything will. I'm just noticing several other positive comments in the chat. Yay. Okay. All right, so a few other things that people think are going to work, but typically don't. Taking a few days off. Taking a few days off of work and sleeping more is not nearly enough to get any meaningful recovery. At best, it might take the edge off. This has been building up for years, often decades. A few days isn't even close to enough. I mean, if you have the opportunity to take a few days off, great, do it. But it's not going to fix it. Another one is the thought that if you just rest, it'll come back. Rest is necessary. It helps reduce the symptoms, but it's not sufficient because it doesn't change the underlying causes. Remember how I said earlier that this wasn't just about the amount of stuff on your schedule or your responsibilities? There's much more going on. And just getting enough energy back to keep going, to keep doing what was burning you out, isn't really recovery. It's just going to lead to another burnout. But really restructuring your life to address those underlying causes and make your life sustainable is what I consider true recovery. But that takes a long time, and it's a much bigger project than a few weeks off of work. That's what my course Beyond Autistic Burnout is about, by the way. It's about how to actually get at the roots of it and restructure your life so that it doesn't keep happening. Other common advice is to get out more, see your friends, don't isolate. The problem with this is that socializing takes a great deal of energy for autistics because we approach every social situation very analytically, not intuitively, to varying extents. Many of us put a lot of energy into making sure that your face is doing the right thing, for example, and that your tone of voice is not going to accidentally piss someone off, or trying to phrase what you want so that it won't be misunderstood, or to think through what the other person just said to find the subtext, to block out the noise around you just to be able to pay attention to what's being said at all. When you approach every social encounter with another, or every encounter with another person like that, it takes a lot of energy. It is possible for socializing to feel good and to be a positive experience with specific safe people, but it still usually costs energy. And that's the problem right now, that they don't have energy. So encouraging someone in autistic burnout to socialize doesn't fix things, it exacerbates it. Here's several more that I want to be a little more nuanced about. They can be positive, but only under specific conditions. But that's usually not the way that they're most often approached. Exercise will lift your mood, they say. Moving the body is a positive thing for health and can feel good and improve someone's mood. But if the expectation is that you need to exercise, to go to the gym, to run several miles, to do whatever you used to do, that's probably too high of a bar. But it can easily become all or nothing. Like, if I don't have the energy to exercise, I'm just going to sit in my comfy spot and do nothing. And doing too much physical work can have the opposite effect of exacerbating the fatigue rather than feeling good. One client said, I'm sleeping a lot, always tired, can't get up in the mornings to exercise, which feels like a snake eating its tail because I need to exercise to feel good. A smaller, more realistic goal is just to move a little bit, even sitting in a chair, flexing the fingers or toes, move the foot or leg, just to get a little bit of oxygen flowing. Light movements. Big goals set yourself up for failure and disappointment. My big goals, I'm by big goals, I'm including things that used to be entirely reasonable when you weren't in burnout. Okay. Another thing is affirmations, the idea to change your self-talk. I actually do think that compassionate self-talk is really important. But the way that most popular affirmations work are basically trying to convince yourself of something that you don't really believe. And that's just a form of self-gaslighting. And they don't work. It has to be realistic and meaningful to you personally. A reaffirmation of something that you personally have learned or that resonates with you at a deep inner truth level, that will actually be helpful. And I teach how to do this in Beyond Autistic Burnout. Another bit of common advice is to add one good habit. The problem with this is that adding things is usually the wrong move. Even things that seem like they would raise your quality of life, because there just isn't the energy to sustain even good habits, at least not until the later stages of burnout recovery. What usually happens is that you try to add in a good habit, stick with it for a day or two or three, and then the initial interest gives way to persistent exhaustion. And you end up with more negative self-talk around not being able to do things, not following through, can't stick with anything. What's wrong with me? Nothing ever works. I'll never get better. In my workshop next month on the stages of autistic burnout and recovery, I'll talk about when this becomes appropriate. Okay. Oops. Again, I'm putting the link in the chat. Another common thing to try is to engage in your special interests. And some autistics find that this does help because it's something that they actually enjoy. And having something in your life that feels good does increase mood, helps with regulation, raises endorphins, gets you moving, and is generally a positive thing for health and well-being. A reminder that it is possible to be happy. But in the deep depths of burnout, it's common to lose interest even in your special interests. Again, this is a common phase. It's not going to last forever. What can help instead is letting yourself off the hook for losing interest. Also, medication. Some people find antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds helpful, but I hear from a lot of people who say that they didn't do anything or just created unwanted side effects, and they didn't touch the exhaustion. I'm not trying to suggest what you should or shouldn't do here. Talk to your psychiatrist or doctor. I'm including this because if it didn't help you, you aren't alone. Autistic burnout isn't depression, although it is possible to be dealing with both. I did for a couple of years. But that's why antidepressants don't necessarily touch it. Another common strategy is to line up a team of specialists. Autistic burnout is not well understood in the medical or mental health communities yet. So filling up your schedule with appointments sometimes leads to a lot of disappointment and not being understood, which can make things feel a lot worse. However, if you have someone who really gets it, it can be incredibly useful, both in reducing the shame, the feeling of being alone or broken, and not having to figure it all out on your own, in addition to actual practical advice. And then there's some people try to move back in with family so that someone can look after you. And this one depends a lot on your family dynamics. During my worst burnout, I moved back in with my mom for 9 months, and she basically let me sleep and brought food to my bedside for when I woke up. And she never got on my case or asked me how long it was going to take or made even subtle hints or questions about how much I was sleeping or when I was going to get better or how things were going. That was the best thing that she could have ever done for me. It was exactly what I needed. And slowly, I got out of the deep depths and started doing things that helped me feel better and better. For some of my clients, this is a good solution, and some of them find that it's not as helpful as they would hope. One client said, I moved back in with my parents, and they've been pushing me to do things. They're too overbearing and don't even attempt to understand my differences. Another thing is asking for regular progress updates. This usually comes from a place of good intentions, wanting to show that you care, that you're invested in the process, that you're trying to help or be supportive, but it can have the exact opposite effects. One of my clients put it this way, talking about her parents. She said, they want to know I'm making progress. I almost flipped a shit. Why can't she understand that just puts pressure on me? I don't know how long it's going to take. One of the biggest sources of underlying stress is the pressure to get better, to do normal things again, to um like to have people around to be sorry, I'm trying to read a comment in the chat and this and my brain like just went away. The pressure to get better, to do normal things again, to be independent. And that comes both from within and from without. I know it can be scary watching someone that you love go through this, and it may not appear like they're making much progress. And honestly, if they're floundering and have no idea what helps, they may not actually be making much progress. But if they're working on resting, on unmasking, on figuring out sources of stress, on what works for them, understanding themselves better, exploring their autism and processing their life history through this new lens, learning to speak up for what they need, figuring out their sensory profile, these are the kinds of things that will actually help. But they don't look like it at first. All of that is going on inside, and it's not very obvious to someone watching. And I realize that it can be concerning for loved ones, and that there's a lot of fear about what if they don't ever get better? But either way, whether they're floundering or working on these kinds of things, expressing concern or wanting to see signs of progress, asking how they're doing, and if things are getting better, those will generally add to their internal stress. I guarantee that they want to get better. I have never met a single autistic in burnout who doesn't deeply, desperately want to get better. They may not know how, they may not be in circumstances that are supportive, but they really, really want to get better, to feel like themselves again, to do things and to not be exhausted all the time. You know how sometimes when something is really hard and you want to do it anyway, but someone says that you should, and immediately you don't want to do it anymore? Maybe you're tired and it's late and someone suggests, maybe you should go to bed, and immediately you want to stay up for hours. That can be what it's like when someone asks for progress updates in burnout. It can trigger an internal need to be the one who makes the decisions. And if someone else is suggesting the thing that you were going to do anyway, you might suddenly not want to do it anymore. Because not because you don't want to do it, but because it needs to come from inside. Does that make sense? Another common strategy that doesn't work as well as intended is to um, take away screens or games because nothing else is getting done. I get asked about video games a lot. A parent will say he doesn't have the energy to sort out one box in the garage, but he has the energy for hours of gaming. How does that add up? Totally fair question. And if the person that you love is spending hours a day playing games or watching shows or on a special interest while the dishes pile up, that's not the thing to take away. Here's why. Video games are low pressure. And I don't just mean that they're fun, though they are. I mean that there's no expectation attached to them. There's no societal norm that you should have reached level 36 by a certain point in life. Nobody's disappointed in your progress. Nobody's tracking it. Nobody's going to ask in a tone that means something. How's it going? How's that game coming? Maybe there's some judgment about too much screen time, but that's different from feeling pressured to do something. Does that distinction make sense? So think about the other things in a person's life: keeping the house clean, having a job, being able to work at all, answering your messages. Every single one of those comes loaded with social expectations. Even in a home where nobody ever pushed productivity or capitalism, we all get these messages anyway. You're an adult, you should be able to handle this. So the gaming isn't taking energy that the garage should be getting. They're drawing from different energy sources. It's like there's one for the things that you should do or have to do or are supposed to do, and a different one for the things that you like to do or that bring joy. In the deep depths of burnout, both of those are overdrawn. But starting to express interest in doing anything, even games or crafts or reading or art or whatever, is actually a good sign. I want to be nuanced here, though. Extensive amounts of screen time can have negative effects, but taking it away just because they're not doing more important things isn't the solution. It is important to have a source of joy in your life, especially during burnout. There needs to be something that they can do that doesn't have an expectation attached to it, something that feels good, that reminds you that feeling good is possible. Okay, another thing that people think is going to work but doesn't, is pushing through or doing the hard thing anyway. The gold standard treatment for depression is to do it anyway, to push through. Action precedes motivation, and this is genuinely effective for depression where withdrawal is an avoidance cycle. But for autistic burnout, it's dangerous. The person isn't withdrawing because of a mood cycle. They are depleted. Adding demands to a depleted system doesn't create capacity. It destroys what little of it is remained. So, what genuine recovery actually takes? Okay, so if those common strategies don't address the real issues, what does? And first, I want to clarify that recovery doesn't mean getting back to a past version of yourself who was able to do more. That is what a lot of people are aiming for, but just getting enough energy back to do the things that burnt you out again isn't really recovery. This is why we can get into a cycle of getting a little energy, doing stuff again, and burning out again. And people can be in this cycle for decades. I was until my mid-30s. Growing up, it wasn't life debilitating, but at the end of every school year, I got sick for at least a week or two. And as I got older, it lasted for more and more of the summer. As an adult, I would crash every year or two for at least a few weeks. And every 2 to 3 years, I would go through a major burnout that would last from months to 3 years and would like shut down my whole life. Like wouldn't be able to work. I wouldn't take care of myself. It was completely off. Excuse me. And I did that for about a decade of adulthood. Eh, no, like mid-30s, like, okay, couple decades before I got to the point where for me, enough was enough, and I had to figure out what was going on. It took me several years and a lot of trial and error to slowly piece together things that I might work, tried this, figured out that, like figuring out what the underlying issues were and what actually addressed them. And I did this just for myself at first, but as I started working with people, I would see the same patterns over and over, and the same kinds of things helped fairly consistently. So I've been refining this, what I've developed as like my system for the last 6 years of my coaching practice. And I've read all of the research on that exists on autistic burnout. There isn't much, but there is some, and it agrees. And when I talk to other autistic professionals, coaches and therapists and doctors who work in this space, there is also agreement on what causes autistic burnout. So all of that is to say that there is a way out. It can get better. Some of us approach recovery in different ways, and I'm going to share with you my take, what I've seen work. This is my system. Okay, going back to what I said a minute ago, the goal isn't to get back to that past version of yourself who could do more, but we do actually want to be able to do more. The goal of recovery is becoming a new version of yourself who can do more sustainably. Someone with better self-understanding, who can tell what's actually going on inside them and act on it. Someone who knows where their limits are and doesn't treat them as having a moral problem. Someone who knows when to stop and when it's genuinely okay to push a little bit and how much. And who's developed the type of life, like the things that you're doing are things that are in more in alignment with who you are and with your values. Okay. Um, so what does that take? In my own experience and my work with clients, I've identified 5 interconnected areas that are necessary for true sustainable burnout recovery. And I get into these in depth in my course on autistic burnout recovery if anyone's interested. But whether you work with me or someone else or pursue this on your own, these are the things that it takes to truly recover and build a life that's sustainable and feels good. These aren't sequential, and progress in one tends to ripple into other areas. So one of them is dismantling internalized ableism and other negative messaging, dismantling the belief that failing to function neurotypically means that there's something wrong with you, and figuring out what does work for you, what your actual limits are, accepting them rather than emotionally beating yourself up because you can't do more than you can actually do, and how to meet your needs sustainably. The principle that I teach my clients and people in beyond autistic burnout is to let go of what should work and go with what does work. Let go of what you should need and accept what you do need. Another area is seeking authenticity, figuring out who you actually are underneath the mask. What do you genuinely like? What actually feels good? What do you need? What isn't okay? Building trust in yourself. A lot of people in autistic burnout have been so depleted for so long, they've genuinely lost access to themselves. The fundamental principle here is that you cannot love yourself while still expecting yourself to be someone else. Another area is developing useful internal awareness, learning to notice and actually use body signals and emotional signals as useful information rather than overriding them. It is a learnable skill and it opens up new possibilities. The principle that I teach here is that when your nervous system is happy, let it be happy. Let the good be good. Another area is building a sensory-friendly life, making your environment actually work for your nervous system, starting with your home, workplace, or wherever you spend a lot of time. so that you don't have that background drain all the time. Making accommodations the default, not the last resort. The fundamental principle here is to choose to take care of your nervous system. And the last area is energy management, learning to be able to tell how much energy you have and giving yourself permission to stop before you hit the wall, not after it. Taking breaks before finishing something, building energy reserves back up very slowly, teaching your nervous system that it's safe to work. The underlying principle that I teach here is that not all activity is productive and not all productivity is active. Does it make sense how addressing all of these 5 areas would have ripple effects into every part of your life? And that if you truly made these areas of your life work for you, that it would change everything? That you'd be able to live and work and interact with others and take care of the many things that need to be done as part of an adult life with these foundations? The tricky thing is that learning about these things isn't enough. It's like learning about how to code or about how to swim or crochet or like learning how to do things, like just learning about it doesn't actually make the changes. And that here's another aspect of it. Like there's 2 types of change. There's technical change and there's adaptive change. Learning those kinds of things like how to code software, how to crochet, learning a language, those are straightforward known skills that you can create a plan for. You can um, they're that are well defined and easily replicable. Those are what's called technical change. Autistic burnout, however, is a type of change called adaptive change. It calls for genuine transformation in significant areas of your life and in your identity, how you see yourself, how you see the world, in the protective mechanisms that you've been defaulting to for decades, in the fears that block progress. And there isn't, let me rephrase that thought. This is why true burnout recovery involves more than just resting or doing a few worksheets or learning some tools and strategies. Those can be part of it. I don't want to knock them. But the way that I see it, relying on those alone is why a lot of people either don't make progress or make a little bit of progress and then plateau, or they feel better for a while and then just burn out again. The way that I approach these 5 areas lays out a path to address the way that adaptive change actually works. It's systematic about the things that are needed and offers options for how to go about them, but it's not prescriptive about what each individual will actually address in each stage. So it adapts to each person's unique circumstances and background and needs. So my system does this in 4 stages. So step 1 is learning, um, is is unlearning the harmful and often untrue messages that we've been steeped in our entire lives that no longer serve you. This is what I call the can't world, the capitalist, colonized, ableist, neuronormative, and traumatized world that we live and breathe in. And doing this without accidentally gaslighting yourself. And then as you unlearn those messages, it always brings up deep stuff. This is step 2. Sometimes these are protective mechanisms, assumptions that we default to, ways that we've been hurt in the past, the reasons that we get overwhelmed or stuck or procrastinate or get perfectionistic or all or nothing thinking or other forms of old gunk. The work here is to get into the deep stuff just enough. My program isn't therapy, but sometimes working with your therapist is useful in this stage. But you get into it just enough to find your 2 or 3 key personal things that will make a big difference when they're freed up. And then step 3 is with that old gunk out of the way, this is when it's so much easier. And in some cases, it becomes possible for the first time to learn those healthy skills that work for you. so that you can use those small bits of energy that you have in building what I call a positive life for your autism and neurodivergence, PLAN, your plan life. And step 4 is only now when the super, this is, bleh. It's only now that the super practical strategies will actually work. This is when those tools and strategies and other practical things become useful and sustainable because there isn't resistance coming up to using them. And you figured out a lot more about yourself and what actually works, and you can adapt it to what works for you and not have the guilt of doing it differently than it's supposed to be. But then, as you try and do that, something else will come up that you'll notice needs some unlearning, and you'll go through this cycle again. This isn't a one-time deal. You don't just go through these 4 steps once and you're done. It's a spiral. New things will come up, and you'll work on unlearning them and go deep into whatever resistance or stuckness you encounter, resolve that, and learn new skills, and then get practical in building those into your life. Does this make sense? So again, whether you learn this from me or take this idea and figure out the details on your own, this is what I've seen work over and over. And it's not just me. Here's what one course participant said. Quote, "What a mindset altering insight I've already had. As you described your framework, I realized I live in the deep stuff, the underground, unseen stuff that so few people are willing to address, but you addressed it and have built a model that incorporates constantly addressing it. And now I see that my lack of motivation for learning and working in other courses was less about a personal failing and more about others' inability to address the real structural problems in our culture. I feel like this is a foundational insight for me and widely applicable moving forward." Okay, so autistic burnout recovery isn't a solo activity. The people around that person matter a lot in how easy or hard it is for them to recover and how long it takes. So, this part is for family, partners, friends, clinicians, therapists, and colleagues. And I want to acknowledge upfront that some of this might be a little bit confronting because a lot of what backfires comes from genuinely good intentions. But our society trains all of us from an early age to motivate through fear, pressure, scarcity, and exactly the kinds of things that produce burnout. But if you're also wanting to move away from those things yourself, here are some ways that you can support the autistic person that you care about. And by the way, just like most disability accommodations, this works just as well for everyone else, not just an autistic and not just people in burnout. So, the first thing that I want to stress is to please believe them and to let them know that out loud more than once that, that this is real, that this makes sense, that you're not making it up. I've worked with hundreds of autistic people in burnout, and when I ask what helped, being believed came up again and again. And the reverse is probably the most common complaint that I hear, not being believed, having it brushed off or minimized or called an excuse. The research suggests the same thing. In the Arnold study, the most commonly stressed, the most strongly endorsed statement about support wasn't a positive one. It was this: "In the past, when I have asked for help, my problems have been dismissed or minimized." But here's something that a person wrote in a conference chat while I was talking about this. They wrote, "My HR and line manager were the first people to ever acknowledge, understand, and believe my experience. It was the difference between my recovery and getting way worse." 2 people at work believed her. And that's what she said changed the direction that things went. This doesn't take money or effort or time. It's just believing them and letting them know that. So, believing them can actually be really hard because it goes against the grain of what we've been taught about how much a person should be able to do in the society and the rugged individualism and productivity culture that we are all bathed in. I heard one parent acknowledge about his adult daughter, she's still going through burnout, but you can't use that as an excuse to do and to not do anything. So let me ask you, what's the difference between an excuse and a description? Autistic burnout doesn't look like traditional sickness or a physical disability from the outside. It doesn't show up on blood tests or medical screenings. I know, I went through all of them trying to figure out what was going on with me during multiple burnouts. I had a hard time believing myself that there wasn't something physically wrong with me when I felt that bad, that drained all the time. And I've heard the same thing from people over and over, from hundreds of people. By the way, it is worth getting checked out to make sure that there isn't something medical going on also, or instead. But what's going on is internal. It's true physical exhaustion, but it's not coming from a virus or an injury. It's coming from extensive amounts of stress over an extended period of time. And the effects of stress have been well documented medically and scientifically. And burnout is affecting a lot of people nowadays. The causes of this particular type of burnout are different about the stress that many autistic feel many autistic people feel just living in our modern, busy, overstimulating, high pressure world. But this is real. So, someone asked me recently how you should talk to someone in severe burnout. Should you be happy, neutral, uplifting? I don't want to be the tone police, but it's a valid question. And in general, warm but neutral interactions tend to work best. Relentless cheerfulness doesn't tend to go over well. It could be a turnoff, or they'll feel like they've got to match it and they don't have the energy to do that. Visible worry is worse because it can reinforce their own worries, or they spend extra effort managing your feelings too, so that you don't worry about them, and that just drains energy. What works is just being ordinary. Talk to them like a person, not a patient or a project, and take the pressure off. You could text something like, I'm around if you want company. No need to reply. Another thing that is important to do is to learn about this for yourself. Don't make them teach you. They don't have the energy for it. If they've given you an article or a video, start there because that's what resonated with them. Then go find more on your own. This workshop is a great start, but there's a lot more to learn. If you're in a position to offer really practical day-to-day help, and if there's something that you can see that needs to be done, please do the obvious thing without being asked. Not, let me know if you need anything. That just creates more work for them to figure out what they need and to get over the internal resistance to asking for help or talking to someone when they feel like crap, or to find the words, or to managing how you'll react, if they're even physically able to talk. Sometimes autistics will go mute when stress. Um, and they may genuinely not be able to get the words out. One of my clients said, there are people who say, just let us know what you need. We want to help you. And then if I do go to them with something that I'm not listened to unless I have a meltdown or present a case. I don't want to meltdown. I hate it. But why won't they listen? Waiting for them to speak up when their brain is foggy and they can't think puts pressure on the least capable person in that situation to do the heavy lifting. And then they don't get the obvious basic needs met. Or needing a reason why they need something can also backfire. If they have to defend everything that they ask for, they may stop asking. And then they don't get the things that they genuinely need. Things like bringing them food, doing the dishes, cleaning up after the cat, scheduling the doctor's appointment, with their consent, of course, dealing with the insurance for them. But that way they don't have to make the phone call. Dim the lights, turn off the thing that's humming, shut the window that's letting the noise in. What matters will vary from person to person, but when you can see something that would be useful, that there's something bothering them, please just take care of it. And when you do it, don't expect thanks for it. If it is actually helpful, they will be grateful, I promise. They tell me that all the time. They just may not be able to get the words out or have the energy to show it right now. But those are different things, being grateful and showing gratitude. So let's talk about isolation. This is a common worry that families will raise. She's alone all day. He never leaves the house. That can't be good for him. For most things, that instinct is right. Withdrawing is usually a warning sign, and getting someone back around people is usually the right move. Here, however, it works the other way. Being around people, even people that they love, even when nothing's going wrong, costs energy because it takes work to process even basic social interactions the whole time. So more contact, getting out there, spends energy that they don't have and sets them back. I know how backwards that sounds, and I'm not saying that isolation forever is the goal. It isn't. But easing off socializing, easing off the expectations of socializing, is what gets them the room to be actually able to recover. It's temporary. It won't always be like this. And when they are interested in going out with someone else or being with someone, or if they do go out, don't make a big deal out of it. Don't heap on praise and say, "It was so good to see you going out the other day." That just adds pressure to do it again. And that may make them not want to do that, even when they could, because if they think that you'll then expect them to be able to do it again. And that may not feel possible at this point. So it can backfire and cause them to withdraw more. Okay. Um, so I get how scary it can be to watch someone that you care about not be able to do things that they used to be able to do, to watch them falling apart in front of you. Your fear is real, and your grief for the version of them that you're used to that's not around anymore is real. And it needs somewhere to be heard and seen and processed. And that shouldn't be their responsibility of the person in burnout. If they've got to comfort you, update you, reassure you that they're making progress, or manage your worry about them, that's extra work that they can't afford. Please take care of yourself, but do it with a friend, a therapist. Book a session with me if you need some reassurance or just some questions answered. Just don't put it on the person in burnout to handle your stuff in addition to theirs. And also, don't put a timeline on it. Having expectations for how long this should take, including the ones that you don't say aloud, is another major form of pressure, and it gets in the way of making the exact kind of progress that you're wanting. Visibly worrying about them, asking, "How's it going?" Comparing them to who they used to be are all forms of expectations, pressure, and a kind of timeline. And this majorly backfires because they feel it and it changes what they do. One client told me that when she starts to feel a little better, the pressure gets louder, not quieter. She said, "The more I find a rhythm, the more I wonder, are they going to expect me to pick everything up again?" She learned that if she looked better for a day, the next thing that she would hear was, "Great, now can you do this?" So she started hiding it. She held back from going swimming, playing music, cleaning her room, things that actually helped her, because letting them show just invited the expectation that she could do even more, and she wasn't ready for anything more. One more thing. One of the most common questions I get is how long this is going to take. One parent I spoke to put it well. Um, what if I take the pressure off and wait another year and it's exactly the same? And I get that. And essentially, there are three possible futures. In the first, nothing changes. You wait another year and it's the same. That can happen. That's what happens when literally nothing changes, when the real underlying issues are exactly the same, no matter what's going on with the actual circumstances of your life. In the second scenario, the person in burnout works hard and fast. They rest for a while, then push themselves to get a job, live independently, etc., get their life back. This looks like real progress, but in 4 months or 6 months or 12, I can practically guarantee that they will crash again and be right back in the same position, probably even more exhausted. This is the cycle that many of us go through over and over until we finally address the things that caused it. This is the third possible future. It's slower. The work is inner work, and it's a whole lot less visible. It brings up a lot of challenging feelings for everyone involved because it means that they're actually working through years of absorbed messaging about what a person's supposed to be, sorting out what's the mask and what's their authentic self, figuring out where they've been performing, what they actually want and need, and how to sit with the uncomfortable parts of finding that out. From the outside, it barely looks like anything's happening, and it might take a year, 2 years, 3 years. But at the end of this scenario, they know what they need to live a good life with the brain and nervous system that they've actually got. And they've changed some of the practical parts of their life to support that. Most of those will be really small little changes, although there might be a few big ones. And many people are able to work at the end of this and support themselves because the changes that are necessary to make that possible have actually been made inside and out. This is the future that breaks the cycle. The second version is faster and it doesn't work. The third is slower and it does. So I want to talk about that third future some more and describe what recovery actually looks like. I'm going to talk about this more in depth in my free workshop on the stages of autistic burnout and recovery, but I just want to leave you with a taste of it here. And we'll be wrapping up in just a few minutes. So early recovery isn't dramatic, which is why it often gets missed or mistaken for not making any progress. Curiosity comes back first, usually before capacity does, wondering how something works, watching videos about a hobby without actually doing the hobby, ideas about things that they might want to try without the ability to actually try them yet, ideas of what they could do for work, what jobs they could get without actually starting to apply for anything or applying but not following through. That's okay. That gap is normal. It's frustrating for everyone involved, but it's a good sign. Also, things become less overwhelming. So a spilled drink is an annoyance instead of a catastrophe. The brain fog lifts a bit. They can do 2 or 3 things a week instead of one and be tired after, but it doesn't take as long to recover. And they start being able to ask for things and to accept help when it's offered. A sense of humor comes back. But the marker that I'd actually watch for is how long it takes them to recover from a setback. Setbacks will keep happening for a long time, but if they have a bad week and they used to be wiped out for a month and now they're wiped out for a week, that is huge progress. If they go out and they would have been wiped out for 3 days, but now they're wiped out for a day, that is huge progress. It's not about whether they crash, they will. What's more important is that it takes less and less time to recover. I spent years after my last burnout taking apart the life that I had and rebuilding it from the ground up. And my life now is so different from anything that I could have imagined back then. And in every possible way, it is so much better. Not because I got back to who I was before, because I stopped trying to. I made a life that works for me. And it doesn't have to reject society or be radically countercultural, although if that's what you want, all the more power to you. I am self-employed and I work full-time running my own coaching practice. I live in a regular house and support my mom. My life in many ways is fairly normal, but there's a lot of little things that are just different enough that they matter. This is what I call my second chance life. Okay, Before we wrap up, I just want to share with you a little bit about my course on getting beyond autistic burnout, and then I'll leave you with the key question as a closing thought. So everything that I've laid out today is what I believe it actually takes, not just to get some energy back, but to change your life so that it's sustainable and it feels good to you. So you break the cycle and don't have to go through this again. And I mean that whether you work with me or work with someone else or figure this out on your own, this is what I've seen over and over that it takes from people following my system and from people reinventing the wheel and muddling through this on their own, which is what I did. There's no version that skips the unlearning and the deep work and just where you just get handed a burnout-free life. But you don't have to muddle through or reinvent the wheel or do it without a map. If you want the shortcut, if you want guidance and a structured approach that walks you through it step by step, that's what my course is for. It's called Beyond Autistic Burnout. I'm putting the link in the chat. And it takes you through what needs unlearning, how to go deep into the deep stuff underneath, the new skills and strategies that will make a different life possible, and with practical tools and techniques along the way to make everyday things easier. It's a 9-month program. It starts October 9th, and the full cost is $900. And yes, there is a payment plan available at $80 a month for 12 months. You can sign up at autismchrysalis.com/burnout. This is the second time that I'm running it live. The first time, the feedback was wonderful, and this time I'm making it even better. I'm improving a few things, adding some resources that I didn't have the capacity to make last time, and breaking it down into even smaller bite-sized chunks that are easier to implement. So even though there's a lot in the program, it's not overwhelming. And for those of you who took the first one and want to join us again for a good refresher and all the updates and the support and community, I'll be sending out an email with special alumni pricing, so don't enroll without that. I just want to share with you a few things that people said who actually took the course. One said, "Holy cow, it's all so good. It's all just what I've been needing." It's like every time I'm like, "Oh, Heather's been reading my mind and planned the session accordingly." I want to express to you my deep gratitude for the burnout course. I got to learn a ton and to do so in a place that felt safe and validating. Thank you so much for the opportunity to make significant, tangible, and meaningful changes in my life. She wrote, "I'm so glad I joined the course. I love it. I'm soaking in as much as I can, bite-sized, manageable pieces. You understand how to teach people and to break it down so that it can get integrated. Seriously, your nuggets of wisdom and your story itself, you basically are you putting yourself out there, and it has shifted and lifted me enough to get up and on my own way. I feel lucky to have found you." And last one, "Thank you so much, Heather. You are amazing. I cannot say enough good things about the BAB course. It has helped me so much, and I continue to go back to the material regularly and always learn something new and useful." So registration is open until the beginning of October, so there's no rush. But if it already feels like a good fit and you'd like to take care of that enrollment thing while you're thinking about it, so there's one less executive function task hanging over you, registration is open as of today at autismchrysalis.com/burnout. Someone in the chat just asked if it's live and or asynchronous. This is going to be a live course, but it's also designed to function absolutely perfectly asynchronously. So I know that the actual times aren't going to work for everyone. Everything's going to be recorded with human edited transcripts. And I know that some people just don't want the live part. So it's going to be fully accessible asynchronously. You can even ask questions asynchronously. So whichever version you like, you can use it that way. All right, so if you sign up early, you could look forward to starting in October, and you'll also get a few bite-sized resources that I'm adding to the course platform ahead of time to use before we start. Okay, so one last closing thought to wrap up. For the autistic people here, I want to reiterate that this is real. It's not your fault, and it's not permanent. It is slower than you want, and it's worth it. The life that you build on the other side is so worth it. And for everyone else, for the supporters here, thank you for coming. to understand something that you didn't have to. The person who sent you this link isn't asking you to fix them, they're asking you to believe them. And I want to leave you with this one last question, because the slowness is the hardest part for many people. If it takes, say, 3 years of really doing this properly, cutting back, doing the deep work, really figuring out your inner shit, and those 3 years build a life that you love that will last for the next 30 or 40 or 50 years, is that time well spent? I've been on the other side of it for 11 years now, and for me, it was so worth it. And I know that I will never burn out again because I've created the habits and the mindset and the checks and balances in my lifestyle that actively prevent it. Okay. I wish you a neuro wonderful day. Um, okay, I haven't really been keeping up well with the slides, but fine. Okay. Um, all right, so I've used the full 90 minutes plus a few for the presentation, but I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes if people have questions. Let me just stop the sharing. All right. Um, I think so if you, sorry, getting a practical thing. Okay, so if you want to unmute and ask a question or ask a question in the chat, I'll be happy to answer. And Coin, if there have been questions in the chat that I've missed along the way, pop them in again and I will see what I can do to answer them. I'm so glad that this has been really helpful for a lot of people. I'm seeing a lot of really kind comments and lots of affirmation that this has been useful. All right. Okay, so there was a question about whether or not the comments about medication apply to stimulants for ADHDers. Um, honestly, I don't want to say much about medication because I am not a psychiatrist or a medical doctor, and I don't want to give advice that sounds like medical advice or that might be taken in a way that could affect someone's medication choices. And honestly, I don't know that much about it. So I'm going to leave that one, but I do want to acknowledge that that's a totally valid question, and there are places that are better suited to answering it appropriately. So someone said, I think at the beginning you might have underrepresented the amount of peer research regarding autistic burnout. It can be tough NTO pull something practical to take into the day. If there's more if there was more research out there that I haven't found yet, I would love to know about it. I will read all of it. Another question, what is the best and most appropriate way to message you directly to share something? I just followed your Facebook page. Okay, so I have a Facebook account, but I don't really use it. I kind of hate Facebook. Email me at heather@autismchrysalis.com. Um, if you prefer to do it on socials, I'm a little more active on Mastodon and Twitter, X, and Instagram to some extent. I also just haven't figured out Instagram very much. All right, what else? Okay, someone. Is there anything specific to look for when trying to figure out what's burnout and what's depression and the maybe conflicting needs of these? Ooh, that's a tough one. Um, I'll be honest with you, I've kind of avoided trying to answer that because I've been through genuine clinical depression myself and autistic burnout multiple times. To me, it was really hard to sort them out. And I think some of what I call depression was actually autistic burnout. Um, there's a website, neuroinsights.com, I think it is, that has some information on the differences between them. I think it's neuroinsights. What I will say is they can look a lot alike and they can feel a lot alike, but I think the biggest difference is the causes is so depression is a very different thing. It's a mood condition, um, whereas burnout is a stress condition. And because the causes are different, the way that you treat them is going to be different. Even if, like, the day to day, someone just lying in bed unresponsive, feeling exhausted all the time, even if that kind of looks the same outwardly, they have very different root causes, and therefore what helps is very different. Okay, someone put in the chat neurodivergent insights. That's is the website I was referring to. Thank you. Yes, that is it. Someone shared, I have described burnout to others as multiple cascading systems failures. Yeah, I like that. Thank you for the webinar. A lot of good info and some hard truths I have to accept myself about being in burnout. Totally fair. Absolutely. Ironically enough, a 12-month commitment to a course is way too much for me right now, though. Just to clarify, it's 9 months, not 12 months. That's probably not a significant difference. And I recognize that that might feel like a big commitment. And I, the first time that I ran it, it was 6 months, and I'm actually adding I'm I'm setting it up so that it's a little bit lower stress uh, over a longer time period because I want it to not be a big commitment. I want it to be a commitment to yourself, to this is a commitment that you're making to your own recovery process, but not be a big bite off of, like, so that so it doesn't feel too overwhelming. Um, so with regards to the course, is it once or a couple times a week live? It's once a week live and with breaks. So there's 7 modules, and each module breaks up neatly into 4 parts, and we're going to do those once a week for 4 weeks, and then we're going to have 2 weeks off. So there's going to be a break. So it's going to be a rhythm of 4 weeks on and then 2 weeks off, so that it doesn't feel like too much, so that there's some space to breathe, so that there's some time to integrate and recuperate and to catch up, even though I don't like the terms catch up and there's no such thing as behind. We're going to talk about that a lot in the course, but kind of practically to catch up. So, um, so it's once a week for about 2 hours on a Friday um, afternoon or evening, depending on where in the world you are. Um, So the idea of doing it that way over 9 months is that it acknowledges that it really does take time to work through these things, that it's not just here's some info, read it, and then everything's better. It doesn't work that way. That's just not practical. And if that just feels like too much to do, I get it. It's okay. All right. Any last thoughts, questions, comments, complaints, compliments? Thank you. You're welcome. Did you say Friday? Yes, it's going to be Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific, which is 2 p.m. Eastern, which is 7 p.m. British Standard Time, and I think 4 a.m. Australia time, Saturday, for about 2 hours. So I'm trying to make it time zone friendly for US and Europe. And unfortunately, Australia and New Zealand kind of get the short end of the stick there. Um, but, but it's also all completely recorded and transcribed. No, so 11 a.m. Pacific. 2 p.m. Eastern. If I misspoke earlier, that this is the correction. So 11 a.m. Pacific, yeah. All right. If you have other questions, please email me, especially questions about the course, definitely email me. There's information about the course on my website, autismchrysalis.com/burnout, and I will be sending out the recording of this with the free info document that you can download and give to your supporters by email in a couple days. And it'll be on my website as of Monday. All right. I wish you all a neuro wonderful day. Bye-bye.